Oliver West paused at the threshold of the cabin door, his heart pounding like a drum echoing in a vast chamber. He stood tall, or as tall as a 14-year-old could manage, with his chin lifted and backpack slung over one shoulder. In his arm, he clutched a slim paperback science journal, its pages well worn, its content more comforting than any bedtime story. This was the first time he had ever entered a first-class cabin, and to him it felt like walking into a dream spun from polished brass and quiet prestige. The overhead lights cast a golden sheen across every surface, and even the air seemed perfumed with dignity. Everything gleamed: the gentle curve of the armrests, the deep leather of the reclining seats, the subtle whisper of linens freshly pressed. He inhaled; it smelled like possibility. Behind him, his grandmother, Dorothy West, stepped forward with effortless poise. Though she was in her late 60s, her stride was steady, her bearing calm like a woman who had long since learned not only how to navigate power, but how to wield it without ever raising her voice. Before they left the curb at home in Greenwich, she had cupped his face in her hands and said, "Remember, darling, chin up. Shoulders square. You belong here. Let no one tell you otherwise." Then she pressed a clean white handkerchief into his palm, like a baton in a relay, only this was not a race, it was a quiet declaration of pride. As they entered the cabin, a well-dressed flight attendant greeted them with a corporate smile and a nod. Oliver responded with a small, tight-lipped smile of his own. He didn't dare blink. Every detail called for his full attention: the hum of hushed conversations, the low clink of glassware being prepped, the quiet dignity that seemed sewn into the very carpet beneath his shoes. They moved towards seats 2A and 2B. Dorothy walked beside him, not ahead, not behind, but beside, as if to say, "This space is yours as much as it is mine." When they sat down, Oliver caught his reflection in the polished trim of the seatback. His dark hair was neatly combed, his khaki pants pressed, and his button-down shirt stiff with starch. He tugged at his collar absent-mindedly, an old nervous habit, before folding his hands in his lap. He didn't speak, but in his mind he recited the reasons he belonged here. Not just because of the scholarship he'd won, not just because of the physics prototypes tucked in his journal, but because he had worked for it. Because he'd earned the respect of minds older and wiser. He thought of the late nights coding of national science competitions, of speeches made in front of judges who expected so little but left surprised. The flight attendant came around with a tray of menus, thick leather-bound, embossed with the airline's insignia. Oliver watched as she passed one to each adult, her hands fluid and sure. But when she came to him, she skipped right over, as if he weren't there, as if the seat was unoccupied. His breath caught not from surprise, but from a familiar ache. The ache of being seen, but not acknowledged. Dorothy noticed. She said nothing, but extended her hand and took a menu, then placed it gently on Oliver's tray. Her expression was unreadable, but her message was clear. Take your place. He opened the menu with careful fingers, pretending not to notice the flight attendant's silence, pretending not to feel the subtle brush of eyes from other passengers, some curious, some indifferent. He scanned the items: truffle risotto, herbed lamb, wild-caught scallops, and let the names dance across his tongue like the promise of arrival. This wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol. It was his first seat at a table that others thought too fine for him, and he intended to savor every second. The hum of the engines had barely risen above a whisper when the flight attendant returned. Her face was composed, professional, every hair in place, every gesture rehearsed. She paused by seat 2A, where Oliver sat reading the menu with reverence, eyes wide behind his glasses. He looked up expectantly, the way a child might glance at a teacher before raising his hand. She hesitated, just for a moment. Then she reached into the tray behind her and retrieved not a gourmet meal selection, not even the expected warm towel or welcome drink, but a plastic-wrapped snack box. The kind handed out in economy. The kind children were usually given to keep them occupied. She leaned in, her voice pitched to carry just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We don't serve gourmet meals to children," she said with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "There's a snack box prepared in the galley. Would you like one?" The sentence wasn't cruel in its wording, but its message was. It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal, wrapped in pleasantries, coated in condescension. Oliver froze. The moment stretched like taut thread. Around him, heads turned. A businessman in 2D shifted uncomfortably, pretending to be engrossed in his tablet. A woman across the aisle pursed her lips, barely hiding her amusement. A couple 2 rows back exchanged raised eyebrows. Oliver felt every one of them. Each glance, each unsaid judgment. His throat tightened, but he didn't let it show. "Yes," he said finally softly. "Thank you." He kept his gaze steady as she handed him the box, neatly sealed, labeled with colorful fonts and cartoon grapes, and then moved on as if she had just corrected a misbehaving child. As if this was standard, expected, appropriate. He looked down at the box. Crackers, a handful of grapes, a juice pouch. It may as well have been a lunch tray at school. Across from him, Dorothy West remained silent. She had not flinched, had not stirred. But her eyes were locked on the flight attendant's name tag, Tracy Malaloy. Her fingers rested on the edge of her tablet, unmoving but alert. Oliver didn't need to ask if she had taken note. He knew she had. He forced a small smile, lifted the lid, and examined the snack as if it were worthy of first-class service. But his heart was beating hard behind his ribs. Because it wasn't about the food, it was about the verdict, that he didn't belong. He glanced sideways at his grandmother. She didn't meet his eyes, but she reached out ever so slightly and placed her hand on the edge of his armrest. No words, just touch, just presence. And in that gesture, Oliver found steel. He straightened, shoulders back, chin up, just like she taught him. Behind him, someone's phone camera clicked. A soft, casual sound, but it carried weight. This wasn't just a slight anymore. It was about to become something much bigger. Oliver didn't eat. He stared at the snack box on his tray table, colorful, innocent, and humiliating. The crackers looked dry, the grapes slightly bruised. He peeled back the plastic anyway, arranging the contents as neatly as he could, pretending this was just another meal, just another moment. But inside, something fragile had cracked. Around him, the first-class cabin buzzed in a different frequency. Now less luxury, more tension. A woman 2 rows back leaned closer to her partner, whispering something while subtly tilting her phone camera. A man behind them muttered under his breath, seriously, and shook his head. The performance of indifference was failing. People had noticed. People were watching. But Oliver didn't look around. He didn't need to. He reached into his seatback pocket and slowly retrieved his paperback science journal. He placed it next to the snack box, the contrast stark and surreal, cutting-edge theories beside pre-packaged crackers. He picked up one grape and examined it with almost scientific curiosity, as if it were part of an experiment. Then he set it down again. He didn't need to taste it. He had already tasted the message. Across the aisle, another passenger, a man in his 30s suit jacket, draped behind him, folded his arms and stared at Oliver with a furrowed brow. Their eyes met for a second. The man gave a tiny nod, subtle, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Oliver looked back at his grandmother. Dorothy West hadn't moved. She sat, poised lips, gently pursed her fingers, brushing across her tablet, the stylus tapping faintly against the glass like a clock counting down. Her eyes, though, were fire. He knew that look. It meant she was thinking, calculating, choosing the exact moment to strike, not with noise, but with precision. Just then, Tracy Malaloy walked by again, heels clicking like a metronome of authority. She paused slightly beside Oliver, looked down at his tray table and said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Still working on your snack, sweetie?" She smiled. That kind of smile. Oliver's hands curled under the table, his fingernails digging into his palms. He wanted to say something, to stand up, to throw her words back at her. But he didn't. He remembered his grandmother's lessons. Still waters run deep. Grace is a weapon too. He swallowed his pride and looked her square in the eye. "Yes, ma'am," he said calmly. "Thank you." Tracy's smile flickered. Just for a second. Then she moved on. Behind her, a few more camera phones discreetly tilted up. More eyes, more witnesses. The cabin had gone quiet, not the soft quiet of first-class refinement, but the kind that follows a shift in gravity. Oliver sat straighter. He didn't need to fight. He just needed to wait. Because his silence was louder than any outburst and far harder to ignore. Tracy Malaloy returned with the practiced confidence of someone who believed she had already won. The aisle before her was immaculate, silverware aligned, drinks refreshed, passengers subdued. Yet as she approached seat 2A once more, her steps held a new flourish, an exaggerated elegance that wasn't just about service but dominance. She wasn't merely a flight attendant now, she was the gatekeeper of first-class etiquette. And Oliver West, in her eyes, had broken the unspoken code. She paused beside him again. The cabin, already holding its breath, seemed to freeze. "Sweetie," she said louder this time, each syllable dipped in sugar and scorn. "I told you already, we don't serve those fancy meals to children. You'll spill truffle oil all over the carpets." Her voice wasn't angry, it was amused. That was worse. In her hand, she held a laminated safety card, tapping it lightly against her thigh as if it were gospel. With a flick of her wrist, she produced another snack bag, smaller than the first, and let it fall onto Oliver's tray table like a gavel in a courtroom. "This," she added pointedly, "is what you get." The words detonated in the silence. Gasps, whispers, the click of camera shutters. Dorothy West did not flinch. She stared out the window, her eyes tracing the white cotton of distant clouds, her expression one of absolute calm. But her fingers curled ever so slightly on the armrest, her knuckles whitening. To an outsider, she appeared serene. To Oliver, it was the stillness before the storm. He looked down at the new snack bag, a crumpled square of foil, a juice box, not a meal, a message. He lifted his chin and met Tracy's gaze for half a second, long enough to register the satisfaction in her eyes. Then he turned away, giving her no reaction. No flinch, no fire, just silence. Across the cabin, passengers shifted. A woman in 2C pressed record again. Another passenger leaned forward on their tray, eyebrows furrowed. Someone whispered, "That's disgusting." And the man beside them nodded tight-lipped. Still, Oliver didn't move. He reached for the juice box, peeled the straw slowly from the side, and placed it neatly beside the snack. His hands were steady now, his breathing controlled. Not because the pain was gone, but because he refused to let it own him. And behind the calm in his eyes, something else stirred awareness. Of every passenger who had looked the other way until now. Of every phone raised quietly in protest. Of every child who'd ever been told they didn't belong. He didn't need to raise his voice to make a point. He was the point, and with every breath he was carving that truth into the silence. Dorothy West had not moved an inch. To the untrained eye, she appeared to be a portrait of leisure, one hand resting gently in her lap, the other brushing the edge of the armrest, her gaze fixed serenely on the clouds beyond the glass. But beneath that composed exterior precision pulsed like a second heartbeat. Every syllable Tracy Malaloy had uttered, every misplaced smile, every slight catalogued, time-stamped, and stored behind Dorothy's eyes like data awaiting execution. Oliver sat still beside her, his silence a perfect echo of hers. He didn't need to ask if she had seen it all, he knew. What Tracy hadn't realized, what so many people never did, was that Dorothy West didn't speak unless the room required changing, and when she did speak, entire systems shifted. Under her folded tray table, Dorothy's fingers moved with practiced stealth. Her tablet blinked to life, and a secure interface greeted her NAAO, Charter Protocol, Administrative Access. Her hand barely moved, but her mind was already 15 steps ahead. Flight number, cabin designation, time of service deviation, personnel name, Tracy Malaloy, confirmed video documentation, public passenger incident. Her stylus hovered over one field, labeled immediate recommendation. She didn't press it. Not yet. Timing like respect was everything. Around her, the energy in the cabin had changed. It wasn't loud, it was dense like the thick air before a storm breaks. Passengers whispered, frowned tilted screens to show headlines blooming in real time. Boy in first class denied meal video goes viral, the first of many. Dorothy did not react. She never did while the story was still being written. Tracy strolled the aisle, oblivious to the undercurrent swelling beneath her. She still wore that same mask of confidence, the kind built on routine and assumed immunity. But now her steps held just a touch more stiffness, the way a performer senses the audience slipping out of her control. Oliver reached toward the snack box and gently adjusted the juice box's position. Not out of need. Out of intent. A small act of reclamation. A whisper that said, "You don't decide what I deserve." Across from him, a young father with his daughter leaned closer, muttering, "Did you see that?" The kid didn't even blink. The daughter nodded solemnly, eyes wide. Maybe she'd remember this moment forever, not because of the humiliation, but because of the restraint. Dorothy finally turned from the window, not to speak, just to look. At Oliver. At the snack box. At Tracy now laughing quietly with a junior attendant up front, entirely unaware that the room had already turned against her. Then, without a word, Dorothy tapped a single button on her tablet. Protocol, prepare for Charter 12. A prompt blinked. Are you sure? She confirmed. Her thumb hovered over activate but paused. She wasn't done watching, not yet, because sometimes letting someone write their own ending was far more powerful than cutting them off early. Beside her, Oliver exhaled, not from defeat but from awareness. He knew now that the silence had reached its limit, and that his grandmother's storm was just beyond the clouds. The moment came with the softest sound. A muted ping from Dorothy West's tablet. Oliver didn't look at it directly, but he felt it. Like the shift in air before a door opens. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the hum of the engines steady, almost reverent. Passengers shifted in their seats, some checking their phones, others sensing the strange silence that now wrapped itself around row 2 like a veil. Dorothy tapped once. Charter 12. Protocol activated. The interface pulsed. A second window unfolded. Confirm. Suspend liberty. Sky operational access to all NBTAAO-controlled terminals. Her fingertip moved without hesitation. Confirm. Seconds passed. Then a cascade of messages. Access revoked. Liberty Sky Airlines. Effective immediately. JFK LAX ATL DFW O'Hare C. BOS MIA. DEN SFO LAS IA. Reason breach of National Passenger Charter Code, Section D discriminatory service denial. The tremor moved outward like rings from a stone dropped in still water. At the NAAO Operations Center, red alerts flashed across massive terminals. Slot denied, slot denied, slot denied. Air traffic control officers paused mid-command. A senior director stood. Dispatch the suspension orders to all field offices. Every Liberty Sky operation halts unless the charter is signed within 24 hours. No exceptions. Back in the air aboard Flight 4722, none of that noise reached Dorothy's row. Not yet. But Oliver felt it. His spine tingled, not from fear, but from something deeper, something righteous. Across the cabin, phones buzzed. One passenger gasped audibly, staring at a news alert. Breaking Liberty Sky, suspended at 12 major airports following viral discrimination clip. Tracy Malaloy, still pouring Perrier into a crystal glass at the front galley, didn't notice. Not until the junior flight attendant beside her murmured, Tracy and gestured toward her own device. What now? Tracy asked, tone laced with annoyance. The junior attendant turned the screen. And there it was, the news headline. The video thumbnail. The freeze frame of Oliver stoic, hurt, dignified, and the snack box beside him. Tracy's lips parted slightly. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the cabin. The conversations had quieted. Too quiet. A man near the back nodded in Dorothy's direction, whispering to his seatmate. A mother clutched her daughter's hand a little tighter. Everyone knew. Everyone felt it. Dorothy West didn't gloat. She simply tapped her stylus once more, folding her tablet like a banker closing a deal. Across her screen, a secondary alert chimed. 22. Major Airlines charter signed, Liberty Sky pending. Market reaction volatile. Oliver sat still, perfectly composed. His snack box untouched now, just a prop in the story no one could unsee. And Tracy. Tracy turned toward them, toward Oliver and Dorothy, and for the first time all flight she looked small. Her polished name badge glinting like irony under the first-class lighting. She opened her mouth to speak, but Dorothy didn't grant her the moment. A single glance shut it down, and the message was clear. We've moved beyond apologies. This was no longer about courtesy, it was about consequence. Far below the aircraft, the aviation world unraveled in real time. At Liberty Sky's state-of-the-art headquarters, where walls of digital dashboards usually displayed calm orchestration of arrivals and departures, a red cascade began. Slot denied, gate rejected, access suspended. Executives froze mid-conversation. Flight managers stared at blinking terminals. In the control room, a junior coordinator whispered, "Sir, they've locked us out of JFK, and LAX, and a supervisor cut in." That's impossible. But the alerts kept coming. NAO control Liberty Sky suspended at 12 airports. Immediate compliance with Charter 12 required. Stock monitors ticked like doomsday clocks. Liberty Sky shares plummeted. Analysts watching the markets shook their heads, murmuring phrases like infrastructure suicide and unprecedented retaliation. A news crawl on national television read, "Airline in freefall after viral discrimination incident." Meanwhile, inside Flight 4722, Row 2, sat in absolute stillness. Oliver could feel it. Not just the turbulence of engines or the shiver of altitude, but a shift in how the cabin breathed. The passengers were no longer bystanders, they were witnesses to a reckoning. Heads turned, screens flickered, someone audibly gasped, holding their phone high for a spouse to see. "Oh my God. It's about this flight. About him." He didn't react. He didn't need to. He was done reacting. He simply folded his hands in his lap again, palms down like a chess player between moves. Up front, Tracy Malaloy stood stiff. Her fingers hovered above the service screen. Behind her, the junior attendant glanced nervously at her own device. The news had spread too quickly, too thoroughly. Even without the announcement, the verdict was everywhere. The aircraft wasn't just flying, it had become a courtroom at 35,000 feet. A faint clap came from somewhere in the middle rows, then another, soft, hesitant. But they grew one after another until a ripple of restrained applause moved through first class. Not celebration, not mockery, solidarity. Oliver blinked, stunned. Not because it meant he'd won, but because something deeper had cracked open. These people, strangers in tailored suits and pressed slacks, had begun to see what dignity looked like when it stood still and refused to apologize. Dorothy did not turn. She remained perfectly composed, her tablet resting quietly in her lap. Another message blinked. 22, Airlines signed, Liberty Sky, remains suspended. Projected loss, $17.8 million. Daily. Public confidence index collapsed. Tracy, slowly understanding the gravity, stepped forward. But she was too late. Even her junior staff had begun to sidestep her. One gave Oliver a quiet nod, almost grateful. And Oliver, he leaned back gently, arms resting on the wide leather armrests, and closed his eyes. The flight continued, the engines hummed. But the power had shifted. This wasn't a revolution of shouting. It was a storm born in silence, and now every inch of that plane belonged to him, not because he demanded it, but because he never had to. The descent began with a tremor, not in the aircraft, but in the system. At Liberty Sky headquarters, a CEO stared at his screen, jaw clenched. The NAO bulletin glared back at him in unforgiving red, immediate suspension confirmed. Access revoked at 12 major hubs. No reinstatement without charter compliance. Legal advisors crowded into the conference room. Phones rang non-stop. PR managers scrambled to draft statements, while financial controllers calculated projected revenue loss per hour, $17,800,000 daily. Someone muttered, "We could lose the quarter." But no one said the quiet part aloud. We lost it because of one flight. One boy. One moment. Tracy Malaloy stood silently now in the glass-walled conference room at LAX. Her posture collapsed into a rigid apology. She no longer carried herself with the polished sharpness of a steward of prestige. Her cap was in her lap. Her eyes were puffy from hours of spiraling headlines and the damning 43-second video clip that now had over 7 million views. Marisol Chen, her manager, sat across from her like a wall of ice. "You didn't just violate policy," she said coolly. "You made us a symbol of everything people already feared about elite air travel. Entitlement, bias, power without empathy." Tracy barely whispered. "It was standard. I didn't know who he was." Marisol shook her head. "That's the point. It shouldn't matter who he was. It matters how you made him feel." Tracy looked up, her mouth trembling. "Am I fired?" But her answer was already there in the HR envelope, slid across the table in the red stamp reading, "Conduct unbecoming. Suspension immediate. There would be no appeal." As the CEO entered the room, he didn't offer her a glance of sympathy. Your name, he said, will be placed on the industry ethics watch list. Every carrier will be notified. The silence that followed was absolute. No pity, no excuses, just consequence. Meanwhile, at LAX's VIP arrivals lounge, Oliver West sat beside his grandmother in a quiet alcove of serenity. Dorothy sipped her tea. Oliver simply sat still, eyes tracking the distant movement of planes across the tarmac. "I didn't say anything," he whispered. "Not one word." Dorothy looked at him, her gaze warm. "You didn't have to." On the screens above national headlines rolled Liberty Sky grounded after first-class discrimination incident. Teens' silent strength triggers industry reckoning. Serve with respect, trending worldwide. Oliver's name hadn't been in the first wave of articles, but now it was front and center, not because he demanded attention, but because dignity when unmoved becomes impossible to ignore. In another room nearby, executives from other airlines were signing the national passenger charter in droves. A new standard was being codified not out of idealism, but fear. Fear that next time it might be their name on the ticker, their logo in the scandal, their airline on the verge of collapse, and at the heart of that shift was a boy who never raised his voice. As they stood to leave, Dorothy took his hand. "You were brave," she said. "I was quiet," he replied. She smiled. "Exactly." The automatic doors of the VIP lounge opened as reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked, but no one shouted questions. No one needed to. Oliver walked past them, his head held high not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as proof that respect once denied when reclaimed with grace can rewrite an entire system. He was no longer just a passenger. He was the standard. In the days that followed, the ripple became a tidal wave. Across social media, the clip of Oliver's quiet composure spread like a spark in dry grass. It wasn't the dramatic kind of viral. It wasn't outrage porn or sensational tantrum. It was something far more disarming, truth stripped bare. A still frame of a boy sitting upright, snack box untouched, gaze unwavering. The internet did the rest. Hashtags bloomed, serve with respect, Oliver West, first class dignity. On TikTok, a wave of teenagers posted videos holding up pretzel bags in solidarity. Some captioned theirs, "If he gets a pretzel, we all do." Others simply stared into the camera, mimicking Oliver's stillness, chin-up, hands folded. Silent, powerful, comment sections overflowed. "This is how you raise a kid." "Grandma West is a legend. He didn't need a menu. He changed the menu." Not all heroes shout. Parents across the country sat their children down to talk about what had happened. Bloggers wrote about dignity. Schools held discussions about quiet resistance. Several airline CEOs issued public statements affirming their commitment to equitable service standards. Within 72 hours, all major U.S. carriers except Liberty Sky had signed the National Passenger Charter. The pressure mounted. News anchors played the footage on repeat. One segment on CNN's Anderson Hour opened with a slow-motion shot of Oliver lifting a grape and setting it down again. Sometimes the anchor said, "The loudest revolutions begin with a whisper." Then came the punchline, and sometimes they're led by a 14-year-old with posture better than a presidential candidate. Meanwhile, Liberty Sky's crisis deepened. Their CEO appeared in a pre-recorded apology, reading from a teleprompter that couldn't disguise the hollow cadence. "We deeply regret the treatment of a minor passenger on Flight 4722. Our company is reviewing training protocols and no one was listening." Not really, because people weren't interested in apologies anymore. They were watching Oliver and Dorothy. In a clip taken the morning after the suspension, Dorothy West stood before the International Aviation Forum, a sea of suits and polished shoes, and addressed the industry with the quiet grace of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. "We teach children to remain silent when they're humiliated," she said. "We forget to teach those in power how to listen." The room didn't blink. She continued, "From this day forward, any act of discrimination aboard an aircraft is no longer a policy violation. It is a breach of the public trust. And finally, let every child know your worth is not measured by age, income, or seat number. You belong. Always." When she stepped down, the entire auditorium rose. Oliver watched from the front row, unsure if he should clap or cry. He did both, because now this was more than his story. It was everyone's. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Oliver West stepped onto his next flight. Boston to Chicago. Nothing dramatic. No cameras, no viral buzz, just a boy in a crisp school blazer, his journal tucked under one arm, and his shoes polished to a mirror shine, same as always. But this time, everything felt different. As he entered the first-class cabin, the air held a different weight, the kind that comes not from luxury, but from awareness. A young flight attendant smiled warmly and stepped aside. "Welcome aboard, Mr. West," she said, handing him a leather-bound menu without hesitation. No snack box, no hesitation, no patronizing glance, just respect. He took the menu gently fingers, brushing the embossed logo, and nodded. "Thank you." He glanced over at Dorothy, who sat beside him once again, as she had during the flight that changed everything. Her scarf was a soft cream today, her eyes unreadable as always, but dancing just a little. He opened the menu. Wild mushroom ravioli, grilled salmon over citrus quinoa, warm brioche with herb butter. He didn't need the food, but he needed the choice. And today it was his. Around him, the cabin exhaled with ease. A young girl across the aisle giggled as her mother helped her sound out the word caramelized. A man in a blazer offered his partner a sip of wine. A flight attendant straightened a pillow behind an elderly woman's back without being asked. Everything moved in rhythm, not choreographed, but human. At cruising altitude, a junior flight attendant approached Oliver and paused. She was the same one who had been silent during the ordeal with Tracy. Her hands trembled slightly back then, but now she stood tall. "Mr. West," she said quietly, "thank you. You changed more than you know." Oliver blinked, surprised. She offered him a folded napkin with a handwritten note tucked inside. "Respect is the new policy. You started it." He held the napkin in his palm like a medal. Later, as he savored the first bite of mushroom ravioli, he glanced at his grandmother. She didn't say anything, just reached over and adjusted the corner of his napkin with the same meticulous care she always had. "You feel welcome now?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Yes, I do." She nodded. That was the point. As the aircraft began its descent, Oliver folded the menu and placed it in his bag, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A child had been told he didn't belong, and he'd answered with posture, silence, and patience. He hadn't demanded the world change, he'd shown them why it needed to. When the wheels touched the runway, no one clapped. There were no speeches, no press, just the ordinary ending of an extraordinary journey. And when the cabin doors opened, Oliver West stepped into the jet bridge, not just as a passenger in seat 2A, but as a standard bearer. Proof that quiet dignity once claimed can never be taken back. Sometimes the world doesn't change with a roar, it changes with a whisper, with a boy who says nothing and says everything. Oliver West didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight, accuse, or plead. He sat still, back straight, eyes calm, and in doing so he revealed a truth many had forgotten. Respect isn't something to be earned by age or demanded by rank. It's something that should be offered freely and without hesitation to every human being. His silence exposed the noise, his restraint revealed the cracks, and his dignity, quiet, unwavering, became the spark that lit a fire across an entire industry. So what can we take from this? If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, told you didn't belong, hold your ground, stay silent if you must. But never shrink, because sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with anger, but with posture. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, not for outrage, but so no child ever again has to earn the right to be seen. Let this be the new standard: serve with respect, lead with empathy, and never underestimate the strength of a quiet voice sitting tall in seat 2A. If this resonated with you, drop a comment, share a story, or simply type "I belong." And if you believe dignity should never be negotiable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone's still waiting to be seen.